Okay, my first point. I can't help but sincerely admire the audience and questions and your visit. It's a Saturday and a few hundred people that are interested to talk, to learn about reforms. It's really fascinating and very, very valuable. Please stop talking. The people in the back. I've been working a lot with students, with future journalists, and I can't imagine that several hundreds of people can meet at such a seminar on Saturday. It's quite unbelievable. We really miss that. We'll lack it in Moscow, and the fact that you're here. And the fact that your answers and your involvement, it's very fascinating, impressive. One more point before I start talking about reforms. I think in this situation, any Ukrainian resident can see something as strange. If you're working in Moscow, the first question you'll ask, normal Ukrainian ask, what is it, this? Are you some kind of a foreign agent or something? So I think I'll need to say a few words. I and my colleagues, the last few years, we feel like we are aliens in Russia. And you can't do anything about that because kind of policy that is supported by the majority of people in Russia. They say it's 86, 87% of people. People who think different try to do something, but there are not many possibilities. In the Vedomosti newspaper where I work, not as an editor, but the opinions department, head of the opinions department. We have Forbes, we have Slon, and a series of magazines. It's hard to forecast, maybe in 6 or 7 months, in 9 months, but less than in a year, there will be no such free media in Russia. And independent centers that provide analytics, like Gaidar Center, Carnegie Center, and Liberty, Moscow School of Political Studies. These are organizations that, in the opinion of Putin's regime, are involved in some destructive activities, something that this is propaganda. And these possibilities are increasing as well. And the expert environment is immigrating. Many people leave the country. And this trend is still ongoing and will continue in the next few years. And let's get to our topic. First, a few words about reforms in general, and then we'll talk about reforms during the war. In general, everything is pretty clear. However, I don't want you to have a feeling that everyone, that all speakers, they think the same. But probably implicitly, Yaroslav Romanchuk provided you his picture of reforms. His speech was brilliant. But frankly speaking, I can't agree with his picture for several reasons. In these reform scenarios displayed by Yaroslav, there seem to be simple solutions. And simple solutions don't work in complicated systems. If it was so simple, like you read a few books and that's it, and there would be countries that would take this example and would show that this is possible. And second, it's better than others, and these best practices are copied very fast because countries should need to compete, and if someone succeeds, others see that and start to copy these practices. And there is no such libertarian heaven like Yaroslav mentioned, and there are some attempts to create these utopias as several separate states, but speaking about large countries, they don't exist. Countries such Ukraine and simple solutions just don't work. And certain dogmatism expressed by Friedman and Hayek doesn't let us let this theory develop. Nevertheless, so just another introduction that can be expressed as just everything's complicated. You know, the solutions that seem very simple, they're either politically unacceptable, or if politics that try to do that will not be elected in a few years, will not be allowed to do that. So it's not that simple. To elaborate these theories, implement them, and it's a difficult thing. There are lots of working papers dedicated to it. These simple solutions seem very attractive. And I should warn you against that. You probably never heard of that. Alexander, I recall Alexander Galich, a famous Soviet singer. You probably don't remember him, but he sang like be aware of the people who tell what they should tell. But nevertheless, these reforms are necessary. The first point is macroeconomy. I'm focused on economy rather than politics. So probably I will tell more about politics, but about economy. Well, free currency is something I can't help but agree with Yaroslav. First, we should regulate bank sector to the state standards, and there are simple things that can improve it. Raising requirements for the bank capitals. If you do that, banks can become a less risky business, and their collapses will not be that dangerous for the economy and society as today, when several banks collapse in the country and the whole country is in crisis. So you can make it less risky by raising requirements for the capital. So there are some developments in Ukraine recently, and Gaidar did it. It was very hard to do politically because during the years of Yanukovych, Ukrainians got used to a stable exchange rate for dollar and euro. It was very economically unacceptable and grounded. Any politician 1 year ago would just come and say, old rate is impossible and your hryvnia will collapse in the next half a year, 15% or 80%. It would be suicidal for any politician. So it was very complicated. And they took very dangerous steps like introducing limitation of selling of currency, and partially they're still in place. Well, they are focused on preventing banks from being attacked by people when they want to take their money back and the bank system collapses. But with this limitation, economy can't exist normally. And what is necessary to do is to decrease taxes and state costs. Maybe not that radical as Yaroslav described. Yeah. For example, if we cancel VAT tomorrow, like in wartime, it will be big problems with financing army. There are no simple solutions. But apparently, the economy can't grow that fast, where officially state costs are 49% of the GDP. And this is it's quite impossible. All Ukrainian citizens know what part of Ukrainian economy is in shadow, and what salaries paid to your parents in cash. So these 49% of the GDP is not does not reflect the situation. Because it's in reality it's like 40%. So in reality this percentage is lower, but the whole shadow sector can be dealt with. But the taxes for salaries is quite high. And the problem is very serious, and which is very unpleasant. There are no simple solutions for that. You can't decrease pensions in a nominal sense. Next thing we should deal with. I'm just going through my plans. Next thing is we have to completely stop all subsidies in the energy sector. The previous speaker told about, subsidies that ineffective factories located in eastern Ukraine benefit from. This is quite painful for the economy, but if you cancel subsidies immediately, your prices for gas and energy for the population will be increased, and nobody will be happy about that. Lots of metallurgical enterprises in the east of Ukraine will go bankrupt, which will result in unemployment, and it is impossible to do that immediately, but you have to do that. The second block of reform deals with regulation, not macroeconomy. And it is more or less clear because the country where law enforcement authorities and general prosecutor's office is a threat for business. Inspections where you have to pay bribes, it's one thing. The second thing is supervision. Both in Ukraine and Russia, all authorities responsible for supervision in the consumer market, in medicine, in the field of technical standards, in construction, this organization is quite ineffective. They're not creating any added value, and all public sector in Ukraine and Russia is the weakest and ineffective link of the economy. You won't reach any effective improvement with lots of limitations and rules, impossible rules. And the problem is that from one side, very strict and detailed rules are introduced for every area. From the other side, everybody understands that you can't live by these laws, so these laws are violated, and it breaks all system of relation state to business. Because if you have rules, but if you have situation where people don't live by these rules, there is a space for corruption, for informal agreements, and so on. Next thing is standards. A certain hope appeared after signing the EU association agreement, because the most important thing, not only that the duties are decreased, but in 2 and 3 years, in the next 2 or 3 years, Ukraine should switch to European standards in the fields of construction, veterinary control, and other rules. How do you achieve that? It's a question, because you have to prove relevant legislation, and there are lobbyists, and for many people this transition will be not beneficial. So this will be very hard to do politically. And it's a big question whether Ukraine will succeed to do it after signing the association agreement. But if Ukraine succeeds, it will be very good for the economy. And block number 3, which can be described as social block, medicine, pensions. It is clear that when a high school teaches kids not to think, communicate, and prove their point, does not teach them to think critically, what is focused on the discipline, just memorizing things. That is not what we need. The problem is that in education, just in any other social sphere, you have this unintended results when you have a certain good idea, and when you implement it, you get results that you did not expect. A very simple example would be the following. Many think that all discussions about reforms in education are quite ineffective when teachers have these low salaries, at least lower than average in economy. And these people are right, because if your school teacher gets 5 times less than a peer manager, the people who are more talented will tend to become PR people, but not teachers. So it's a natural selection. And 3 years ago, Vladimir Putin instructed to raise salaries for professors and teachers. It seemed to be good ideas, and they created a plan, a strategy, and they thought that the best people should be involved. And since they don't have a socialist economy, you can't do it otherwise. What was the result? The university education. It's evident when you are taught by people who just were involved only in education, and were not involved in any practical work. They're professional teachers. They teach, and this is all they do. It is evident that they're isolated, and they teach you what was the case 30, 40 years ago. This is why the best universities try to involve practitioners. And if they want have a journalist lectures, they tend to involve practicing journalists who are not professional teachers, just in any other area. But this rule of unintended results resulted in being impossible to involve practitioners for these lectures, where these practicing journalists could maybe attract some students for internship. Yes, they got more salary, but they had more hours. They were not full-time workers. They were not professors. And universities didn't have any money to pay for these services because all they had was spent for raising salaries of these full-time workers. It's just an example of good idea to result in bad results, bad outcome. Okay, 5 minutes. Speaking about war,
actually, first of all, I think Ukraine has two major advantages right now for Ukraine that actually allow, theoretically, to draw and to conduct a very successful reform program. At least there are two major challenges that is not yet clear how can be solved. And maybe if someone knew what has to be done, that will be another Nobel Prize winner. The two advantages are about the following. First of all, because in the previous government it was bad literally for everyone, then this is a good chance to start from scratch. When your institutions are in better conditions right now, it is hard to reform them than if they're bad or just totally poor. Clearly, the police is just demanding bribes and making money for themselves and not protecting people, the population, and institutions. Then reforming such a police is a lot easier, because clearly that it's failed to perform its prior functions. And this is factor number one. Factor number two is that the result of Maidan has become this giant Ukrainian inspiration among the people, and a growing social capital, which is a brilliant foundation and conditions for growth. The feeling that people can trust each other, that not all the people are enemies, they're same thinkers, and we can actually get into something better. These are the things that I think are very fruitful and creating an enabling environment for the reform. These are advantages, but there are two challenges, however. And very good as well is that we got rid of one single problem, which is in Russia, for instance, right now, no successful reforms can be conducted, not just because there's Putin there and is not going to leave anywhere, but in their majority they cannot actually happen because the country still has a lot of money. When the country has a lot of money, then any problem can be just solved by just pounding all the troubles in the money. In case there is any concern, you just can buy in people and organizations and so on. So the problem is solved. The anxiety goes away. Reforms can only happen when you can no longer survive in the current condition. So, and this Dutch fever that Russia is surviving right now, that is based on the fact that huge money is spent on such huge, large infrastructure projects that are called white elephants, like the Olympic Games in Sochi and so on. But the availability of this money does not allow you to do anything about it. Unfortunately, Ukraine does not have the challenge like this. At the same time, however, actually any IMF loan or any money coming from the EBRD that the current government is hunting for reduces an impetus for reform. And the more successful the money comes from Europe, the less need there is to do anything on your own. Fortunately, this problem is not existent or almost not existent. However, there is a very interesting, a brilliant economist of modern times, a Chicago University professor, an Italian by trade, Mr. Gingagis or something. I terribly want to wish that those who are interested in economics to read the works of Zingalis Rajan. He just recently, probably a month ago, had an idea of this Italian fever or Italian disease. When there's a lot of money in the country, then they put on a lot of fat and prices are going up and the country loses the capacity for fast movement forward. And an Italian fever or disease, what Zingalis outlined, is in effect what the English language calls crony capitalism. Different family linkages, clans, you have your own people, you can't do bad to them because there are a lot of relatives, friends, and acquaintances in the government, which leads to the situation when Italy, like other southern European countries, it's quite a traditional country. And all those things are very widespread over there like this. In a country, in an economy, in a business, there's no meritocracy mechanism. When people attain success and get their power, not just because they're best in their area, not because they're one of the top of the list, but just because you're related to someone, you're someone's nephew, someone's father-in-law, or anything like that. So far, there is a feeling that despite the Yanukovychs fled and his families, with this mechanism in Ukraine, nothing is happening, actually. Maybe it's not as strong as it is in Greece and Italy, which is quite significant in Greece as well, actually. But the fact is that all the best government contracts are still belong to family companies, family-run businesses, that businesses of some officials are registered on their kids and their children, wives, and this is an economy for yourself, which is called for your people, which does not allow you to create an enabling competitive environment, which is also a big trouble for any kind of reform. It turns out that politicians, when they do the reform, they just have to, while they are in office, to make it the way that your people will not face any difficulty in the future. On a war, it actually makes this problem even, I mean, the problem grows to horrifying scale. And in this respect, it's not yet clear what has to be done. And those who knew what to do, then there would have been another Nobel Prize winner, like I said. When institutions don't work, and at the same time when you have warfare, and this is a hybrid warfare in the East, I'm not going to be explaining that part, because you can read about it. 30 seconds to go. So whenever you have neither the army nor properly working police, and Kolomoisky with his companies supplies fuel for tanks, then you just can't do the taxation reform in a situation like this, so that to make a war story for the Kolomoisky. So it's a main principle. If you have war, and if Kolomoisky is performing a very important defense functions for one of the key regions, you cannot have the large-scale taxation reform to make Kolomoisky a loser, because it's just politically incorrect right now. And actually, this is the same problem exists and touches upon all the other things. So we have understanding how the law enforcement has to be reformed. But as soon as we do it, as soon as we cut the police jobs triple times, then you're going to have former special troopers or police officers in the streets doing God knows what, who have no sympathy for the people who fired them. So what are they going to do? They will join some pro-Russian forces in the regions, will start getting involved in some radical negative activity or anything that does a lot of harm for the country. So any kind of reform may also be possible if you make it during the wartime. It can actually kill someone. It can even kill, not straightly forward saying, but it can kill somebody's popularity of some politicians, political figures. That's why generally I have a feeling that if you rush too much right now with the very important reforms like the pension reform, taxation reform, educational, law enforcement, and so on, then just because there is war and it's out there, one just can't make it the way it's supposed to be done. With the great number of reforms, I think the best scenario would be just to keep developing them and think well before you implement them when the war ends. And right now, to do only things that are vitally important for this war not to, in this war not to be defeated, to withstand it. This kind of reform aimed at specifically that would have been given a lot of mandate and a large support from the population. Clearly, when your army generals involved in armor procurement give 50% kickbacks, then you might not have a lot of inspiration and encouragement for the reform. You have to sort out that issue first, just because otherwise it will not be possible to win the war and not to be defeated. That's the thing that everybody takes clear. That is important. All right. But I'm already taking too much time. Thank you, Boris. But let's switch to Q&A. Please raise hands. Those that I will just remember to raise hands. I will be bringing a microphone to you. Any more questions? Could I just ask, not for only questions, but also remarks and your ideas? I think it's not less important. No, but not more than 30 seconds, please. Do not take as much time as Boris already did. My name is Bogdan. Thank you very much. So I have such a thinking. In one of the Ukrainian Forbes editions, there was an article which is called "Ukraine lacks Chicago boys. We do not have enough professionals." It was just one of the points that we don't have our own Pinochet. It was a very remarkable situation when quite a liberal, market-oriented magazine writes quite non-democratic things. In your opinion, can you actually compromise your own consciousness and sacrifice some political liberties to actually get some economic development? Because these things, democracy and economic development, sometimes do not correlate between each other. Thank you. It seems to me that democracy and economic development correlate really well between themselves. No, I'm not giving any microphone to you anymore. Thank you. This Chilean example, that's clear, but economic development was out there. I might be mistaken, but I think dozens of thousands of people sacrificed their lives for that sake. And actually, democracy and economic development, I think really there is a very good correlation between democracy and economic development. As authoritarian leaders, I just cannot understand how come an authoritarian leader could help Ukraine to get all the transformation and reform that is required right now. Because an authoritarian leader, take a look at the northern neighbor. Would an authoritarian leader do anything good to that country? The only goal of an authoritarian leader is to maximize his powers in terms of strength, to make it stronger and stronger so that your peers would actually get weaker and all your competitors, and to actually expand it in time as long as possible, to take the throne and sit there as long as you can. These are the two main goals of any authoritarian leader. But if for that sake you need to have a reform done, yes, he will do it. But if for this reason you need no reform, but you need to just give away money to everybody, then a leader will do that. No problem with that whatsoever. So you cannot rely on that fact. And another actually Ukrainian advantage, which I forgot to mention, is actually it's been talked about for a long time among not economists, but social scientists that have been quite spread out in the Ukrainian media. There is a certain degree and gravity of truth, that there is some kind of a national tradition. There is the tradition of summits, certain Ukrainian anarchism, and fortunately, all these things are very good remedies against an authoritarian leader like that. But again, you can take a look at your your another neighbor, Hungary. I just doubt an authoritarian leader would actually long for very successful reforms in Hungary right now, and there is radical transformation. So I doubt that. Hi, my name is Anastasia. I'm from mass media. As you already said about reform during the wartime, I would like to ask a question particularly about that. So we're facing the situation that there are folks actually go fight in the east, and we're collecting money for them to support them, to give them some kind of support, but not to lose time. I think we have to make the reform real fast, because the country is now at a crossroad about where should we start from. Anything we start fails. What do you think? What is it worth to start from? What is the aspect that has to be given priority to make a successful start of the reforms, and so that the country could develop really fast and evolve rapidly? Oh, thank you. That's a brilliant question, of course. However, there's another recommendation which I wanted to leave for yourself. For those who are interested in that, please, mainly this information is available in English. It is called Vox Ukraine. or Voice of Ukraine, whatever it calls. If you just go Google it.
Oh, voice, да.
Sorry, it's not Vox, it's still Voice. Sorry, excuse my Latin. Well, it's still Vox, I think. Well, anyways, that is all available on Facebook, and this is a group of Ukrainian economic experts, economists working at European and American universities who are trying to dwell on this issue. And in Russia and Ukraine, there's very strong communities out there in the world. Somebody is teaching at Chicago University, London Economics School, etc. Ukrainians managed to get together, have organized things, and this is quite a strong toolkit to develop reforms. About 20 to 30 Ukrainian experts working outside of Ukraine, they joined together and put their effort together to actually think about those things. So what do I start with? I just can't answer to that question right now. I think we would have needed maybe 20 people around to set them at the round table and make a study together. Maybe close them in some cottage outside of in the middle of nowhere for 3 months or something. So I'm going to try to formulate all the criteria. In the current situation, which is ongoing, one can do only those things which are vitally important, which will not do any harm to the current Ukraine's position in the wartime.
But will strengthen it instead. If it's clear that the army is like this, is when the generals are stealing instead of fighting, it's an ideal time for the reforms, just because it's a huge support. Because the war is lost not by the soldiers, but by stealing generals. Why? It's very hard to understand why a lot wasn't done in this connection. If we understand the mechanism, how out of the current structure you can create an army by Israeli example, you can clone this example to the state administration, any other budget sphere. Because you don't just fire stealing generals, but hiring generals that will not steal. You have to think about it. You have to some compensations for the retired so that they don't become dangerous for the current government. Not just replace people, but think about mechanisms, stimuli. Thank you. I have the following question. Two questions. The first one, you mentioned Holland, the Dutch disease, and the price for the oil is 70, not 150 like a year ago. And you mentioned that you can't cut social payments, you can't annoy Kolomoisky, you can't fire police people that take bribes. You said that you can't cancel the VAT. How much GDP you think Ukraine will lose in 2015? In this case, I will give you a very short answer on the Dutch disease. Because this price drop of oil to $80, they will not affect the economy immediately because these reserves are accumulated, and there will be no immediate collapse. Fortunately or unfortunately, this will not happen. There will be certain inertia, and if oil price is fixed for a year, we can tell this could be the case. In this situation, this price fluctuation will not give immediate effect. They provide immediate effect in certain things because the ruble fell related to a dollar and the euro, but in terms of state budget, the states still have enough money to buy people support. This will not be affected very much. Your second question. Thank you very much for your second question. And I don't want to say that you shouldn't do anything, canceling VAT and cutting the social payments, but you can't just do that without any thinking. You have to be very careful about it. Because otherwise, especially in the war situation, we will be trapped in this irresponsible situation. Growing an army of our rivals, which is not good in the situation of hybrid warfare. Or we deteriorate the situation a lot of people are in, which is not okay as well in the situation of war. It's not just you can't do that. You have to be very careful doing that. You have to think twice. Otherwise, you will have the same effect as Yegor Gaidar in the early 90s, where a lot of right steps were taken, but the result was the people weren't happy about reforms and the market economy for the next 20 years, and people started to demand a strong hand. So Mr. Gaidar did the right things, but these things were done not carefully, and the results were quite sad. Okay. The next question will be in English, so please, for those who don't speak English, take your headphones.
I came from Poland. I represent the Civil Development Forum, which is a think tank founded by Leszek Balcerowicz, known from the reforms in Poland. So I would like to have a comment about what you mentioned about the timing of reforms and radicality of changes. Poland, but also Estonia, are countries which prove that quick changes, radical changes, are something that works. And Poland here in Ukraine is often used as an example in terms of economic policies. And also Leszek Balcerowicz is calling the time of 1989, he was calling it a time of special politics or extraordinary politics. So it's time when people are ready to take sacrifices, and you have to use this time, like maximize use this time efficiently, so that if you act too slow, then the results of reforms are unseen, and then people and politicians lose support. So I would like to not agree with you about the ideas that Ukraine should not reform tax system very fast, should not reform the subsidies to the energy sector, because I think this is time of extraordinary politics in Ukraine. And of course there is a war in the east of Ukraine, but we have to remember that in 1989 the political situation was also complex. There was Soviet army in the Polish grants when we were conducting this radical reform. So I think Ukraine should not waste any more time, and I think radical changes it's what people will accept if they bring results really fast. Thank you.
Спасибо огромное.
Thank you very much. So you speak English, don't you?
Польша, к счастью, находилась намного в более благоприятной
Poland was in a better situation in the early 90s than Ukraine today. Poland didn't have any war with the enemy that is bigger and more powerful economically.
Вот. Вторым моментом, который позволил это сделать,
And second thing that allowed to do that,
во-первых, у Польши очень хорошие соседи. Можно
Poland had good neighbors.
что сделано в Германии, в Австрии.
They could judge from German, Austrian experience, and so on. And third, Poland didn't have any problems with joining the European Union.
Эти все три фактора.
And these all three factors
У Украины, к сожалению, отсутствуют. Но
is something that Ukraine lacks. But thank you. It was a very important thing I forgot to mention. I think that actually
Прибалтика.
Poland and Baltic countries,
Но больше всего Польша
but
должны
mostly Poland has to become,
уже после окончания войны все-таки
after the war, of course,
образцов для украинских.
an example for Ukrainian reforms. And I can give you an example
Польша сделана реформа местного
how
самоуправления.
Ukraine introduced their
Это, в принципе, примерно то, что
self-administration
кажется,
reforms.
сейчас должны были бы изучать все
Is something that
значит, украинские
all
ученые,
Ukrainian
кто занимаются регионалистикой, местным самоуправлением, и пытаться продумать
those who study
ну, вот, не
regionalistics and self-administration. I mean, not the version introduced by Groisman, but think about the Polish experience. And besides, Poland can become an example for Ukraine in terms of the regulator and the third sector, public organizations. In Polish, this sector is quite strong in Poland than in many Western European countries. This country had a very good legislation in terms of working of powers, the percentage of non-commercial sector, and this thing related to their public control that started to develop very rapidly in supervision from different social groups over authorities and how the budget is used and the participation of citizens and budgeting. It's something that can be learned from Poland. In our school, Moscow School of Political Studies, we bring in Polish experts to tell us about how Poland could do it. We have no more time for any questions, but you can ask Boris during the party, because he will be at the party. But yeah, I will not be from the very beginning, but I will be during the most interesting part. I want to give the floor to Marek, because he has a good policy paper, what he talked about.
This paper here in the room, it's called Poland and Ukraine, A Portrait in Divergence, and it's a comparison of Polish and Ukrainian policies for the last 25 years. So if anyone is interested about having a copy, there are some more here. And if there are not enough, then give me your email and I will send it to you. And what is the most striking thing in this paper? In 1989, Ukrainian part of the Soviet Union was wealthier in terms of GDP per capita than Poland. Now, 25 years ago, Poland is one of the most successful country in the region, and we showed in our policy paper that radical reforms and good free market policies implemented in a good timing can work and can bring success to the economy. Thanks.
Борис, последнее слово, и мы вас благодарим.
So Boris, your
Последнее слово не знаю.
last few words. Well, it's all a lot already.
Вот, давайте
Okay.
я просто вместо последнего слова еще парочку рекомендаций.
I'll give you more recommendations instead because
В Украине есть довольно
actually
интересных людей и организаций.
Ukraine has lots of interesting people and organizations that work on these things I mentioned, but unfortunately
Несколько мало
they
известны.
are not that well known.
Прекрасные совершенно инициативы.
Well, first,
Реанимации,
you have a
реформ.
good initiative such as reanimational set of reform, and you have to watch closely their discussions and read their reports, and will be a very good thing to do.
Есть центр, который называется Case
And they have a
CASE.
case of Ukraine Center, and Dmitro Berchuk works there, and a few more people that try to elaborate the budget and public sector reforms.
Есть такой, я не знаю, он завтра будет тут или нет.
I'm not sure if he will be present tomorrow. Mikhail Minikov, a political scientist.
Который как бы очень многие вещи интересно продумывает и говорит в плане политических.
He's good in
Это какие-то такие рекомендации, которые хотелось вам оставить.
providing some good ideas for reform. So these are my recommendation to you. Thank you.